Okay, this is the roadmap to success for Beast and Crash. Now, because of the barking, we just had Crash and one of the guardians head upstairs so that you can hear actually what we're saying. Sit. Okay. These dogs bark a lot. Now, the guardians, for this, a lot of people, this is a real annoying problem, but because the guardians actually have some hearing issues, they're lucky in that this doesn't bother them as much, but we have a baby coming in guests, and we don't want the dogs to be barking and acting that way. In my estimation, the dogs are barking so much because they really consider themselves either superior to or equal to the humans. And because of that, they get frustrated when the humans don't listen to them. The dogs are also competing with one another. It's okay, buddy. I know. You're so vocal. They're competing with one another for the top spot. And this has created a little bit of a rift between the two dogs. Not all the time. They're buddies most of the time. But when there's food around or a resource, they kind of are showing teeth and growling and snipping at one another. Dogs are, I like to say, like Ricky Bobby, if you watch the movie Talladega Nights. If you ain't first, you're last. They don't really care about their position if they're not the first position. So in order for these dogs to stop barking and stop engaging in a lot of the unwanted behaviors that they have, the guardians are going to need to take over the leadership position. Now, the guardians aren't doing anything wrong. It's just that dogs are base their behavior on what they see us do, not what we've already done, like buying a house. They're like, I didn't see you building a house, so I don't give you credit for that. So the dogs get a lot of exercise right now with each other, but that's probably not the most structured way for them to burn exercise. We want them, I'm not saying that we don't want them to play with each other, because that's great, and that's one of the benefits of having two dogs. But if we go out for a structured walk, where we keep the dog next to us rather than in front of us, we set the tone, we tell the dog when and where we're going, and the dog gets used to following our lead. But because these are both higher energy dogs, I'd like to see the guardians continue to have them play fetch. Look for also mind games. We worked on a leadership exercise and we worked on a focus exercise, and they're both great at it. But for dogs, they don't use their brain very often. So if we can get them used to using their brain, that can be as taxing as a physical activity can be. All right, so I'd like to see the guardians walking the dogs at least once a day, preferably early in the day. This will help a little bit with exercise, but mostly with leadership. I'd like the guardians to consistently and strictly enforce rules. And Beast here doesn't even realize that he is getting to break one of the rules right now because they're used to being on the couch. But for dogs, the higher they sit, the more rank or status they have. By letting dogs sit at the same height as us, we say we're equals and peers, then listening to us becomes optional. If we don't have any rules for dogs, that's another way that they get the impression that we're equals. So I would like the guardians to eliminate the couch, number one, for at least 30 days. If not, but actually longer than 30 days. 30 days would be the minimum. As long as the dogs are barking, trying to work things out amongst each other and not listening as well as we'd like, furniture should be off limits. Now, a lot of my clients sleep with their dogs and aren't really willing to give that up. That may be the case here. That's fine. If we're going to do that, then the dog should not be allowed on the bed unless the human gives them an invitation first. Everybody. All right, I'm going to let you go since you're obviously, you'd rather go bark at his buddy. All right, so no furniture for 30 days. Every time we let the dog in or out of a door, they have to sit. If the dog doesn't sit, after I say sit one time, I'm going to walk away from the door and sit down and ignore the dog completely. If the dog barks or puts up a protest, I don't say anything. After a minute, I go back to the door and I give the dog another opportunity to comply the first time. If it doesn't comply, I walk away this time for 2 minutes. Next time for 4 minutes. And I keep on doubling the length of time. Now, the more we repeat a command to a dog, the less we mean it. So if we get in a habit of only saying it once and then actually leaving, the dog's like, I screwed it up myself. So matter next time that they tell me to do something, I should probably do it the first time. It's going to take a little bit of time before this kicks in. Just stay consistent with it. Now we have 2 dogs. So if I say sit and Crash sits, but Beast does not, then as soon as Crash sits, I open the door, let him go out, and I block Beast and don't let Beast out. I usually start this with the dogs being in the location that they desire to be in the least. So if the dogs would rather be inside, as the case is here, we would start practicing this with the dogs outside. We're not going to allow the dogs to jump up on us anymore. With an invitation is different, but right now the dogs are jumping up to demand attention. So I'd like the guardians to start petting with a purpose. So next time the dog jumps up on us or nudges us, we're going to give it a counter order and tell it to sit. As soon as it sits, we're going to pet it under its chin to facilitate a nose-up orientation, because a dog feels good about itself, its nose is in the air, and I don't want the dog to feel good about the things that we want them to do. I'm going to only say the command word once. Now in this situation, it'd be nice if we could actually, well, I can't do it because I don't have 3 hands, but I would go sit immediately afterwards so that we can associate the command word with the action. Let me see. Along with petting with a purpose, that leads us to what I like to call passive training. So anytime the dog comes to us, we're going to pet it and we're going to say whatever the command word is and hand signal for come. Even though we didn't ask the dog to do it, the dog did the end result. Every time the dog sits near us, we're going to pet it and say sit, or give the sign for sit. Every time it lays down, we're going to pet it and say whatever the sign is for lay down. After we do this enough, the dog will be able to do these things when it hears or the command signal or the sign. Somebody is very persistent wanting to get upstairs. Let me see. A couple of exercises that we worked on. We worked on a focus exercise. That involves the dog sitting in front of us. We have our knees shoulder width apart. I have a handful of treats in my left hand, 1 treat in my right hand. I'm going to make my hands look uniform. I don't want to be like this here and like this here. One of our guardians was doing a lot of fidgeting. So we're doing this. We want to just be very still. As soon as the dog looks up in our face, we raise it about 6 inches in front of our nose, and then take a right angle and go straight towards the dog's mouth. Imagine there's a string between the dog's eyes and your eyes. Your first movement is to break the string, then take a right turn and travel down the string and pop it in the dog's mouth. And then we usually say the word focus. I learned today this means focus, but because that was spooking one of the dogs, we're going to say this as a hand signal for focus. We want to do that at first until the dog is just looking at us, pretty much staring at us the whole time. Then we're going to start adding an extra second. 1 second here, 2 seconds on the second movement. And then we're going to do that with usually about 8 to 12 treats each time we do this. I'd like the guardians, each one, to do it once a day with each dog. You can practice more. It'll get you better results. After a day or two, I'd like to start adding a second. 1 second, 1, 2 seconds on the second movement. And both of the guardians would do this. Now, the dogs don't necessarily always work in the same time frame. One dog might get it faster than the other. That doesn't make one dog smarter or any better than the other dog. We're going to go at the dog's pace, not at our pace. So don't get frustrated if one dog goes slower. Within about a week to 10 days, we want to be up to the point where we can go 1 second, 20 seconds on that second movement. Remember, we're holding the treat between our face and the dog's face, so the dog is gazing at our face the whole time. Once we've achieved the 20 seconds, then when the dog starts barking or doing something inappropriate, we can give it the focus command, and the dog stops and looks up at us. This is a great way to redirect the dogs. Another exercise I did was the leadership exercise. And this involves placing a treat on the floor between the human's feet. The human backs up step by step. Now remember, we do this, we keep our hips pointed at the dog no matter where it goes. And the dog is not allowed to come within a 3-foot circle of the treat once we put it down. Now, once the dog sits down, we take a step backwards. But at first, the dog is going to probably look at the treat and then look back up at us. As long as it's stationary, we take 1 step back. Left foot, or right foot, left foot. Only 2 steps. And then we stop. We wait for the dog. The dog's still staring at us. We wait for the dog to look away, then look back, and then we take another step back. Always save at least 1 step behind you so that when you get to, when the dog sits, you can take a step backwards at the same time. It's really important that when the dog sits, we take a step back right afterwards. That's a communication. As soon as the dog lays down, it's communicating, it's given up, it surrenders. As soon as it does that, we're going to give it permission to get the treat the way that I showed the guardians. Now, at first, the dogs are going to protest a little bit. One of the dogs was circling it. If the dog circles, then we cut the room in half after the first circle. And we block the dog by stepping this way. If it tries to go this way, and we keep our hips pointed at them the whole time. Then we're going to start adding time. Once the dog lays down within about 10 or 15 seconds of us putting the treat on the ground, then we're going to add about 5 seconds before we give the dog permission to have it. Then the partner is also going to go to 5 seconds. Then we go to 10 seconds for each, 15 seconds for each person, then go by 15-second intervals up to 1 minute. Then we go from 1 to 15 minutes at 1 minute intervals. Now the dog can move around the room as long as it doesn't come within 3 feet of the treat. Anytime it comes within 3 feet of the treat, if it's at 4 feet, we hiss. If it's at 3 feet, we stand up. Well, I'm sorry, we take a step towards them. We're already standing up. If I'm sitting down, the dog's laying down, and the dog gets up and tries to take the treat, I would hiss and stand up simultaneously. So we're kind of mirroring the dog. Eventually, we want to get to the point where the dog can wait for 15 minutes before it gets permission to get the treat. They can move around the room. They just can't come within that 3 feet. Now, we're going to use the escalating consequences that this exercise is really designed to help you practice the escalating consequences. Remember, the first one is we're going to hiss 1 time per incident. Second thing we do is abruptly stand up. And we're going to pivot and keep our hips pointed at the dog because our authority goes whichever direction our belly button is pointed. We're going to keep pivoting until the dog is stationary. By stationary, it can stand, it can sit, or lie down. As soon as it does any of those 3 things, we take a step back, left, right, and then we stop, wait a pause, and then we can go back to doing what we're doing. The third consequence is we march directly at the dog with some steam. We want to have some good momentum. The dog needs to think, if I'm still here, I'm getting run over when the human gets here. Giving and taking territory is a big part of how dogs communicate with one another. I'm going to march at the dog no matter where the dog goes. If the dog goes inside, I alter course and go towards the dog. I stop marching at the dog as soon as the dog turns sideways to me. At that point, I go to the second consequence and I'm pivoting my hips, waiting for the dog to be stationary. Then I take a step backwards as soon as it stands, sits, or lies down. That's the third consequence. The only time I don't stop when I'm marching at the dog is if it's inside of a border or a boundary. Sorry.
No, I have to go.
Oh.
So it's good to meet you.
Nice to meet you. One of the guardians has to go. We're going to finish this up and he can watch the rest of this later. He doesn't realize now we're going to have a party. He'll laugh when we see this later. The fourth consequence is to put the dog in a leash timeout. We put the dog in a leash and we step on the leash about 2 feet away from the dog's head. What we're doing is the same thing as a baby timeout. The dog will usually protest. I let him protest. I don't disagree. As soon as the dog sits...
I'm not sure. I think it's going out.
Oh, it stopped?
Oh, is he in the truck?
Oh, I parked next to it. Oh, yeah, I'll have to move my car. I see what you're saying. We're going to wrap this up quickly. All right, so the fourth consequence is we're going to step on the leash. If the dog throws a temper tantrum, we don't say anything. As soon as it sits down, we take the foot and we slide it towards the dog to take the tension off of the leash. I realize I'm blocking you. I'll be there in a sec. As soon as the dog lays down and is calm, we take our foot off the leash, and then the dog is free to walk around. It shouldn't drag the leash around unsupervised because that could get it it could injure itself. A couple minutes later, it does the wrong thing. We step on the leash, reapply the consequence. If it's fine, then we take the leash off a couple minutes later. Okay, so there's the escalating consequences. Basically, we're going to wrap it up here. If the guardians, are we still filming? Are we still going? Keep going.
Stop it. Oh,
Nope.
I did.
Did you do it?
Stop.
No. Did she stop?
Nope,
Okay,
not
great.
yet.
All right. So if the guardians have any questions, they can call me directly. You can also search Dog Down Problems for a lot of dog behavior and training tips. Remember, everything you do trains your dog. Only sometimes you mean it.